Identity, culture, and self. As you explore and write literature, you begin to realize that authors do more than entertain, more than teach. As you write, you reveal an intimate picture of who you are, what you believe, and where you come from. Readers begin to understand your values, become familiar with your family, your childhood, what moves you, and about what you truly care. The act of writing becomes an intimate conversation between you and the reader. In order to truly create this bond, you must first understand those things about yourself. Who are you? How did you become who you are? This journey of personal exploration and reflection requires you to consider yourself from a different perspective, to look inside and consider what motivates your actions, and then to examine how those motivations became intrinsic to you. Personal identity and culture are not created in a vacuum. Everything about you is formed through experience, through learning, through observation. Each moment, beginning at birth, molds your identity and influences you to become the person you are today, and the unique and different person you'll become tomorrow. Identity is not a fixed point. You don't turn 18 and stop the process of growth. You continue to change and adapt throughout your life. Paramount in the identification of self is understanding the factors that influence your cultural and personal identity. The most obvious group with which people usually identify is their ethnic group. Are you Latina, white, African American? How do you think this affects how others see you? How does it affect the way you see yourself? When humans see a person, they immediately begin to categorize her, to make assumptions about her based on appearances. This is the way our minds construct meaning. We group like items and make connections based on those groupings. When you see me, you make assumptions about who I am and my culture. These stereotypes may have some basis in fact. I did grow up with the advantages of being part of the dominant culture in the United States. I have not been treated as a second-class citizen because of my ethnicity, but I have been a victim of gender bias. Consider the ways in which you identify with the stereotypes of your ethnicity, of your gender, and the ways in which you differ. Ethnicity, besides frequently dictating peer group and social norms, is often a reflection of family heritage. Where your family comes from influences behavior, customs, and traditions. These influences are very apparent in how you celebrate, but they extend beyond holidays to foods, acceptable attire, and even life choices, including norms for marriage and childbearing. In the United States, since we are primarily an immigrant country, the traditions of our forefathers are supplanted by those of the larger culture as time goes on. The longer we live in the U.S., the less connected to the traditions of our ancestors we become. How does this lack of shared heritage affect you? Do you feel disconnected, or are there ways you can still find traces of your cultural heritage if you still look closely enough? As important as heritage, where you are from also plays an enormous role in who you become. The country, the state, the city, and the neighborhood from which you come and in which you live all influence the way in which you act, speak, and even how you think. The politics, the religion, the language of those with whom you associate becomes an integral part of your identity. I grew up in Texas, but where and how I was raised in Texas influences my cultural identity. Not only do I associate myself with white culture, but growing up in San Antonio, a city that is over 55% Latino, I also identify with Mexican culture. Because I was raised appreciating and understanding a culture outside my own, I have an ability and a desire to explore more cultures and gain a greater understanding of the way their societies work. How is where you come from prominent in the way you live? Or the lens through which you see the world? How is it reflected in what you write? The most important influence on the development of identity is family culture. We become who we are because of, or in some cases in spite of, our families. For most people, family teaches you your value system. The early values you learn from the people who raised you will influence everything from the way you treat others to your level of education to how you spend your leisure time. Your moral compass is closely associated with these early influences. If you grow up in a family with little integrity, it can be a struggle to show integrity. If you grow up in a family that values justice, you become indignant at injustices. This is not to say that you cannot change these values, but changing values is difficult. A family, however, does not have to be the one into which you were born. You can create a family to reflect and reinforce values, good or bad, gained in other ways. How has your family, its traditions and beliefs influenced you? Do you react to the world in the same way as those who raised you, or do you struggle to find a family group that aligns with your personal belief system? Writing is a powerful tool for communicating culture and identity. Consider what you learn about the author in the following poem, and think about how the conversation is deepened through shared, intimate language. How can you use these ideas to strengthen not only your connection with your readers, but also how other writers connect with you? I am. I am from the cooling waters under a broiling white sun. From the screeches of cicadas adding a discordant note to melodic splashes of harmonious laughter. I am from the claustrophobic second floor, climbing through the window, scraped by rough oak bark, descending, escaping into the soft embrace of endlessly walkable nights. Spice-scented, moonlit oasis in the city. I am loved and petted and ignored, because a quieter one is probably okay. I spring forth from luck and self-preservation and values formed early, from yeast rolls covered with a checkered dishcloth and Christmas trees trimmed only in blown glass, from Becky, Pekka, you know who I mean, as my mother mixed up our names in her haste, and celebrations of death and joys in life. I am made of words, written and read and spoken, from familiar haunts and faraway adventures, from behind Peggy's immense shadow, from my father John's back and my mother Carolyn's arms, from Grandma Alice's laughter and Grandpa Van's hugs, and yes, from a stubborn little piece of my grandfather Robert I. Carr, if I care to admit it. I am from failing grades and phone calls home, to summa cum laude and tears of pride. Christmas Eve is fajitas and tamales and enchiladas, and as many friends as the house will hold. New Year's is lobsters and butter, eaten on the deck to keep the mess out of the house. Suitcases and picture frames and hat boxes full of photos, scrutinized for resemblances, and tug-of-war over which side it is better to favor. I am a sailboat gliding across a clear blue lake, a wave breaking on the beach, a path wandering through the hills, a guitar chord strummed on an autumn evening, a book opened in curiosity, a tear cried alone.